Welcome, everyone. I imagine or hope that a few more will join us in time. It's only 1 o'clock and people might stray in. But anyway, welcome to the session on grad student funding, SSHRC and OGS. This is something I do every single year, except that I'm doing things a little bit differently this year. So first of all, let me let me share my screen. I'm going to go out in and out of this once or twice. And I'm going to go to, okay. So this is about applying for SSHRC and OGS. There are other funding possibilities, but these are the two major ones that are considered external funding. So you apply the money comes from outside of Lakehead, outside of universities in general, and students apply for that money. Throughout this session, what I'm going to ask you to do is if you have a question, I'd like you to use your electronic hand, or if you don't want to do that and verbally ask a question, I'd like you to post it in chat. And I think that Meredith will sort of monitor those things for me. Thank you, because I get distracted when I'm reading chat and I can't talk and read at the same time. So if you could do that. And just in case some of you don't know where your electronic hand is, if you hover over Zoom and you see to the bottom right, you'll see your reactions, and there's the raise hand right there. So hopefully that's clear enough. So I welcome your questions anytime. I may not get to them exactly right away, but I will get to them. So the way that this is different from last year is normally I would do a big presentation thing, and then I would open it up to a student panel. However, because of certain logistics, I'm going to focus on the recipient panel right now. So I'm going to stop sharing.
That's really great.
And I am going to... Thank you. I am going to introduce three panelists. All three are recipients of OGS or funding. And the reason that I invite a panel is because I ask a panel each year, as I did these three, who I'll introduce in a moment, to speak a little bit about, very briefly, a little bit about their process for applying for funding, and specifically any advice that they might have as applicants and as successful recipients for the rest of you who I presume are going to be applying. So let me introduce them and they can sort of wave or say hello or whatever. Rupinder Grewal is an OGS recipient. She is second-year master's. I've worked with Rupinder a fair amount. She was my GA. She took a class or two of mine and so on. So thank you, Rupinder, for coming here and being part of this. Fatima, are you still here? I know that there you are, yes. Fatima Ahmed is also an OGS recipient, second-year master's, I believe. So welcome to the session, and I look forward to hearing what both of you have to say. And also, last but not least, we have Ghislaine Atema, who is a doctoral student, third year, and a recipient of the Canada Graduate Scholarship Doctoral Program. And for those of you who don't know, I'll get into this a little bit later, but that program is the absolute top-notch of funding you can get as a doctoral student. So congratulations and welcome all three of you. What I think I'll do is I think I'll open it up or ask you to speak one at a time, maybe in alphabetical order according to last name. So Fatima, just in case there's connectivity, power problems where you are, I'll ask you to speak first.
Of course, thank you for this opportunity. So as Gerald mentioned, I'm a second-year Master's of Education for Change student. I have a dual specialization in Indigenous education and social justice education. So the things that I learned during this experience primarily had to do with, and I'm going to go into a few tips that I gathered over time. So the first one would be to use your first course, which is Education 5011, to learn about and adapt a working research methodology for your thesis. So before I started my thesis, before I started my master's, I had a pretty good idea of what it is that I wanted to look at. I wanted to look at any commonalities between Islamic traditions and indigenous traditions. And then I got very fortunate that I got a job to work up north in an Inuit community called Kangirsuk. So that's how I refined my research focus to go from looking at just indigenous traditions like overall and specifically to saying I will look at specifically Inuit traditions. So because I had a good idea and I had done my bachelor's of education at Lakehead, I had an opportunity to talk to people like Dr. Sonia and Dr. Meredith about my research interests, and they had recommended the research supervisor to me, my thesis supervisor. And because of that, I was going in a little bit more prepared into my foundations course. So my first feedback or my first point of advice would be to use the first course to start thinking about your research methodology, and then to use the foundation course if you're doing a specialization in Indigenous education or social justice education, environmental education, to use that to start thinking about your research. One thing that really helped was using the readings from these 6 courses that I had to do before I started my thesis to start building sort of like a literature review. So what this meant is that I was building a bibliography as I was going along. Along with that, I was trying to keep all the very relevant quotations in a separate file. And that's something that I'm still working on, but just having when I eventually got to a point where I was doing a literature review for my directed reading with my thesis supervisor, it was really helpful to know where most of those quotations were coming from. And using a bibliography website like CiteFast or an offline program, I think Zotero, I don't use it, but I think that's one of the offline programs that you can use. And it was really helpful. So when I applied for both the OGS and the SSHRC, I didn't get the SSHRC. I was an alternative for that, but I did get the OGS. And for that application, they usually ask for 1 page of a research proposal and 1 page of references. And I think it looks good if you have, like a filled out or more than half of a page for references rather than a half empty page. And when you're doing your 6 courses for your thesis route, if you're doing 6 or if you're doing 10, I promise you will read so much that you will easily be able to fill out that page with readings from the courses. I did use my assignments in those courses to start working on one of my to start working on my content. And so I told my professors for each of those courses, listen, this is what I want to do. Is it okay if my assignments are responding to that question? And they were all okay with it. Getting advice from Professor Gerald and Professor Meredith was very, very valuable. It was actually Professor Meredith who encouraged me to apply. I didn't think I had a chance because I didn't have very good grades for my first undergraduate degree, but Dr. Meredith was really encouraging. So I would recommend speaking to them. They are amazing sources of support. Then I would say that think of have positive self-talk. It's a bit of work, but even if you don't get the scholarship, at least you found time to get the first draft of your research proposal and first 3 thesis chapters written. So think about it like that. Simply finding the space and time to complete this by December 1st deadline, which was for OGS, was instrumental in helping me make the most of my directed reading, which I completed with my thesis supervisor later on during the winter term. So I find that just the process of application was so instrumental in moving forward my research focus. So I kept saying to myself, you know what, even if I don't get the scholarship, at least I'm getting the work done that I would have done in about 2 more months. I'm getting a first draft ready, and I can't explain to you how useful that was. Between the 2 processes, the applications, the OGS process is much simpler, especially if you've applied for financial aid at Lakehead University before. But the SSHRS process is a lot more time consuming, so do leave a little bit of time for the SSHRS RC scholarship competition. And yeah, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thanks, Fatima. What I think I'll do is, you've covered a lot of ground and I want to make some commentary about that. But I think what I'll do is hold that off till later and students can ask questions, but I think I'll turn it over to Ghislaine right now. If you would like to add to what Fatima said or give some advice as you've experienced things throughout this process, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerald, and hello to everyone. I won't spend long going into my background. I'm a little bit older, so I've worked in research at NOSM for about 10 years. So I've seen research grants, and I think part of that helped when I started to write for funding for my program. So I'm a third-year PhD student, socio-political, cultural constructs of education. So I'm looking at medical education and community engagement more broadly in health professions education. I'll start by saying the first year I didn't get anything. I flopped, nothing. And I was pretty disappointed because I thought, oh, come on, I write grants all the time. I should be able to do this. But the reason is, or the lesson from it, is that I actually took what I wrote and thought about it and got feedback on it afterwards. And I realized that what I had done, and don't make these same mistakes, is first of all, I rushed, never a good idea. Secondly, I used a lot of passive language in my proposal. And the third thing I think that was most detrimental was that it was difficult probably for the reviewers to make connections between the work that I was proposing to do and the importance to it in the larger scheme of things. So regrouping for the second year, I took those lessons and tried to start far earlier and develop a proposal that I thought would speak to the reviewers. And so that's what I'm hoping or suggesting can be done by all of you. And it's a bit of a backwards approach. So I look at how it's being evaluated or adjudicated, and then making sure that I am answering those questions in the development of all the pieces of the application. So that's everything from the proposal to my significant contributions, my CV, works cited, and everything else in between. And what I wanted to do is to make sure that those researchers who are evaluating can very clearly look at their rubric and check off where I've answered what the required parts are for that grant. Often we think of writing our proposals as a way for us to showcase what we know, and that's part of it. But the other really important piece is that it's going to be evaluated and put on a criterion scale by people who don't know the work that we're doing, aren't intimately familiar with it, or volunteers, who are doing this on the side of their desk with everything else, and probably have lots and lots of proposals to review. So I tried to make it as easy for them to say yes to the work that I was doing. And it was a different take than the approach I had used the year before, which was I was trying to convince people that this work was really important. But actually what I did this time is I looked at the fine print of how it was going to be judged. And I made sure every single component in that was very easily seen in my application. So I would suggest to all of you to take some time and look at how it's going to be scored. Or the other piece too is to see who's been funded before and the types of applications that they have, because those are really good clues as to what successful ones look like versus ones that don't. And the other piece to that is, I think I know what the reviewers are looking for, but I'm also really, really familiar with the work that I want to do, which absolutely skews my ability to see where, my blind spots. So another piece that I did well before is I had people who knew nothing about the work, the area, or anything read my proposal. And if they could say to me, I know what you're doing, you're going to do this, and you're doing this because it's important because of that. And if they could answer those questions, I knew I was being clear enough to somebody who is completely unfamiliar. So those are the two things that I did very differently with the second year versus the first year. The other part that I want to stress to you is you're being evaluated on your potential, what you've done, and the research idea that you have. So often, I think sometimes I'm too humble about things, or I don't want to come off as being forceful or confident. And what I thought that was, or we're often taught that that's really a good thing to have humility. But this is not the place for humility, because this is the place for a convincing argument. So you really have to demonstrate that you have the capacity and the knowledge to do that. And you can say those things without sounding like a bragging, piece of whatever, okay? It will feel very uncomfortable at first. And it did for me. Like I would say, I have done, I did, using just straightforward, concise language makes a very big difference. Don't be afraid if you've done something that is unique to highlight that. For example, I had done some curriculum work in my day job, but it was translatable to the work I was doing. And I actually wrote, and I used to kind of scoff when I would read this, but I wrote first of its kind in Canada, and I made it bold. And I thought, ugh. But then I thought, okay, you know what? It is first of its kind in Canada. And I do want the reviewers to see that this work is novel, right? And it's answering a question. So don't be afraid to go a bit out of your comfort zone and really to showcase your skills and abilities, because that is a very big part of what they're looking for. Does this person have the knowledge, capacity, capability, and potential to do this work? And if they can answer yes to all of those things, how can they answer yes to those things? It's what you show in your CV. It's what you show in your most significant contributions. And don't be afraid to take, I did a lot of volunteer work, and I had a whole big section on it. And my supervisor said, okay, we can make that 1 or 2 sentences. And we did. And it gave me more room to add other things. So don't be afraid to kind of jam pack it in as best you can, and to sort of figure out, if I were the reviewer, what will be the most important things I would want to know about me that would convince them that I'm worthy of this funding. So, and all that to say, in academia, we are often told no. And rejection sucks and it hurts. But the real piece, or I guess I've seen a lot of researchers, and I'm new to being a researcher, but what I've observed over the years is the researchers who can take the feedback, move their ego aside, and come up with a better program are always the more successful ones. And it's hard, it hurts you. I felt awful. I was like, oh my God, I can't even do this. I don't even have the skills or abilities. I did. I just needed to dress it up a little bit differently and be confident in my skills and take the feedback on what didn't work and make it better. So I leave you all with that, and best of luck. And the other thing too, if you're a PhD student and you write a SSHRC application, you can put that in your comprehensive portfolio too. So it's a win-win in my books, because now I'm getting to the point where I'm putting my comps together, and I'm actually going to put both in there as evidence of scholarly activity, and it's just more evidence of that. So I wish you all the best of luck, and thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ghislaine. Like Fatima, you offered a whole bunch of really great points. So I hope people were paying attention, writing notes, whatever, because there was some really valuable things in there. And lastly, but not leastly, Rupinder, can I turn it over to you, please?
Yep. Thanks, Gerald. Hi, everyone. I'm in my second year in the master program. I'm double specializing in environmental education and social justice education. And last year I did apply to the OGS and won it. And I had also applied for the SSHRC one, but I got alternative for it. So what I learned through the process are a couple of different things. The first one is, even if you haven't figured out your research proposal completely, I remember I was in the first semester still doing coursework along with trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I wasn't completely certain about it, but it's still better to do the application. And even if you're not 100% about your research questions just yet, and using that coursework, like Fatima had also mentioned, to really help guide you while you're doing, trying to put your research statement together is really important, because it gives you more time to think about the research questions that you want to do earlier on rather than later. And especially talking to others about your research ideas, such as a family member or a friend or a professor, really helps while you're writing your research statement. For the SSHRC application, one of the things I found really time consuming, other than writing the research statement, was the Canadian Commons CV. I'd never seen that website before. So if you haven't had a look at it and you're planning on applying to SSHRC especially, that's definitely something I think worth checking out before you even do the research statement, so you could complete it and get it out of the way. If I were to do that part differently, I would create a separate Word document and, make a list of all of the presentations I've done, events I've hosted and participated in, those mentoring activities and publications, like the things that you don't necessarily include in your resume, but things that you've definitely done are important to add into that Canadian Commons CV. So having that list created beforehand really makes it just more seamless of a process while you're trying to fill that online application out. For the OGS, that's a one-page PDF document compared to the SSHRC one, which allows you for a second page for references. So for this one, you have to make sure that because you have to include in-text citations and your reference list all on one page. So you would have to keep your references to minimum. I would say probably around 5. But my thesis supervisor at that time also had stressed how important making connections are while editing your work for flow. So weaving things together in one page is usually very difficult, but it's important to add those connectors wherever possible to maximize your coherence, to make it a strong argument, and also to add that towards the end, the last sentence about this is why what I'm going to be doing is so critical, because it makes it seem, it really tips the balance for your work when there's a lot of other good proposals, right? And couple of other things is just having more than one person edit your work, because when you have a second and third person to look at your work, it's important, because what one person notices another may not, and it really just helps to fine tune your research statement. And the last part was the process of applying to scholarships is really daunting, especially when you do it for the very first time. I remember how anxious I was the entire time. But again, having that positive thought, like thinking and, just talking to others about it who are going through similar things helps to really, helps to get through that process, because it could be very daunting and anxious, but it's definitely worth it to just go through that process and yeah, see how it goes. But good luck to everyone. And I think it's definitely worth going through that process. And even if you're unsure about it, just go for it.
Thanks, Rupinder. That's a great point you've raised. Just sort of do it, even if you're not fully ready, even if you don't fully have your research sort of encapsulated and captured. I wonder if anyone, now I see there's stuff going on in chat. I don't know if there's questions. I haven't looked at it, but I'm wondering if anyone has any specific questions for either all 3 panel members or one of them or whatever. I will open it up for questions at the moment.
I'll just say that the chat was basically agreeing with the presenters.
Okay, great. Are there any questions from anyone about elaborating on a certain point or anything like that? Sabrina.
Thanks, Dr. Walton. My question is, I have a long-standing career in higher ed, but I don't have a long CV history of publications. I've done one conference presentation for my research. Specifically, how much is that weighted? Like, should I just realize maybe I won't be considered because I don't have an extensive CV?
I would say that it partly depends on your level, first of all. So if you don't have any publications, if you don't have any presentations yet, and you're a master's student and you're applying for funding for your second year, that's not going to weigh in all that heavily. If you are, for example, a third-year SHRC student, a third-year PhD student, it may matter more if you don't have any publications or presentations or anything of the sort. So in the PhD program specifically, and maybe even the second year of your master's, if you are intending on doing a PhD, it would be a good time to start seeing about getting some stuff published that you've done, or doing a conference presentation. And right now, while conferences, most of them anyways, I think still are online, it's actually a good opportunity to do a few of those, because, you know, there's not the expense and time commitment of travel and, you know, you name it. And usually conference fees for grad students are pretty reasonable. So now would be the time to start building that so that you've got a few things on your academic CV.
I really appreciate that. I'm doing all those things, but I'm a PhD student second year, and I've done one conference, but I don't have anything to present on because I haven't done my research yet, other than like a, you know, literature review and that sort of thing. So I'm feeling a little bit low on the pole of scholarly work here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I would advise is maximizing what you've done, and I hate to use a crude word, but packaging it in a certain way. So you said you're in your second year, right?
Yeah, I'm in my second year. I've worked for over 20 years in higher ed, but I'm in my second year of my doctoral.
So you've got a few things going on, and really it's the proposal that is going to be the major factor here. So if you can use the opportunity to draft a proposal, you might have to struggle with it if you're not fully clear on what your research is yet. You know, you might have to play with it a little bit, and then also frame that proposal within the literature, i.e., you know, the scholarship doesn't explore this area all that much, so that's where I plan on taking my research, and developing a really clear problem statement or research question and keeping everything focused on that for the entire proposal. It's a good exercise for you to really get into that and clarify things for yourself. So that's what I meant by maximizing what you have, because even if you're not sure on your research, and you're not alone in that, I can tell you that right now.
Oh, I'm very sure on my research. I'm not even worried about it.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
Sorry.
very clear. I just don't have any good CV stuff going on.
Right. So if you're clear on your research, then put that across the 2 pages, and that's going to be your major thing, and then build your CV as best you can.
Well,
That's
and I would also say that Sabrina has a whole lot of things that she's doing for the university that are around mentorship and that, and there's ways to enter that into your CCV. When I got the SHRC doctoral fellowship at the end of my second year, it was my 3rd time applying, so you know, we don't always get it the first time, but I was in about the same case. I had 1 presentation from my master's, maybe 2, and I had 1 article that came out of my thesis, and I was still successful. So I don't think you're that far behind. What they're looking for first and above all is the quality of the argument that you make in your 2 pages.
That is absolutely the case. And like Meredith, so I didn't start applying for these things until my first year of my PhD program. And I didn't really have a very good idea of what my research was at that time. And I was just sort of, you know, stumbling in the dark, figuring out how to do this. I think Rupinder mentioned the logistics of this and how daunting it can be. So that's where I was at that time. I was not successful with SHRC. So like Ghislaine, I totally took a nosedive on that. I did get OGS, but it's the SHRC I really wanted. So I chased after people to give me feedback after the case, and then I modeled it there for a second attempt at SHRC. And I bombed on that too. but then shaped it up for the third attempt, my third and final attempt, and managed to get it. The reason I think I managed to get it is because I took all that feedback and I realized, okay, my research has to be more than just conceptual, and I added in an empirical data collection piece and tied it better to the literature, and lo and behold, I got it. So yes, we all have our failures, and it sort of stung, but it's nothing personal, and it is about taking that feedback and building something stronger. So that's part of the reason that I do what I do right now. And I also have been giving feedback on SSHRCs at faculty at SFU, that's where I started, and faculty and students here at Lakehead since I started 14 years ago. So, you know, I've developed a really good sense of what a proposal should look like. And so hopefully this session will help you to give a good heads up about how much work doing a competitive proposal is going to be. Ghislaine?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, that specifically for your use, Sabrina, I didn't have a lot of traditional publications. I had some presentations, but what I was able to do in part of my application was the relevant work that I had done in my working life that translated into my skills and abilities to do this work now, I highlighted it as well. So, and that's particularly important for those who have been in the working world for a long time. So if you've done presentations, if you've been invited to be a guest speaker through your work, you can still put that into the application because it demonstrates your ability to do these things. Now, it may not be that you have a lot of publications right now, and that's okay. Like I said, I didn't have a lot. And for all of those of you who are worried that you don't have high enough marks, I can tell you right now, I am not top of my class, okay? I was working at the time. I had 3 kids going to school full time. I did okay. I didn't do super, super well. And so for those of you who think, oh, I don't have high enough marks, or I've heard you have to be top, please let me dispel that rumor for you right now, okay? It's the potential they see in your abilities and the research that you're doing and its potential that is the most important part of that. And so don't be afraid to kind of go back on what you've done professionally and put those things in there as well. If you've done any HQP, whether it's formal or informal, you can put that in there as well too. And you know, don't worry that you're not good enough. You absolutely are. You may just have to take your CV that you have right now, your professional one, and see what you can put in there that will translate. That might help get the ball rolling for you too.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thanks, Glenn. When I was applying in my year, I got muted. I didn't have much on my CV either. I think I had a conference. That's about it. But I took from my professional life, as you were saying, Ghislaine, I took from my professional life a few other things I'd done and tried to make the best of it. So, but it's the proposal that is really going to matter. That is for darn sure. I want to cover a couple of things based on what our 3 panelists presented. First of all, I think in a nutshell, what all 3 of the presenters would say is that you do absolutely need to start early. So if you want people to look at your proposal, then you need to write it early and you need to get it to them early because they need time to review it, and then you need time to edit it accordingly, and so on. Also, if you are asking, say, your colleagues to read your proposal, then it would be, of course, good reciprocity for you to offer the same thing to them. And when I was a grad student, we did have a sort of sharing thing going on. Back then it was hard copy paper. We weren't doing it electronically, but you know, we did share back and forth and we gave each other feedback, and we looked for things like ideas that were too complicated, simplify it, and so on. I think it was Ghislaine who emphasized the point that you have to make it easy for the reviewers. They don't know you, you don't know them, and if you make this a hard job for them, they will probably just move on because they have a lot of applications to evaluate and score. And if it's too complicated, if it's too jargony, if it's written like an expert, then that is not going to serve you very well. That strategy serves you in other ways, not for this particular audience. It is not a good thing to do. So write simply and clearly. That is sort of one of the things you have to do. And it's sometimes not as easy as it sounds. Meredith.
The other advice that I would piggyback onto that was given to me by my supervisor, and she said, Meredith, don't let them get past the first paragraph without telling them why they're reading this and what your purpose is. And that's going to be important, because if you're working up to your purpose, as we tend to do, like, here's the background, and then this is why it's important, and this is what I want to do, you've lost them. So start with, this is important, this is what I want to do, and this is why. And you'll get their attention earlier.
Yes, I agree with that. And having read oodles and oodles and oodles of proposals from faculty and students, I have to say, sometimes I'm reading them and they're not getting to the point and they're not getting to the point. And so I'm just getting irritated. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Tell me in the first few sentences, because otherwise I'm getting irritated and I don't really like that. So it is very wise, as Meredith said, to just spell it out right away. And then move on, and then sort of give some background detail and through lit review stuff and all the rest of it. But your first paragraph should be bang. They know exactly what you're doing and why. There needs to be a good rationale. You can't just say, I want to do this research. You have to give a good rationale as why. Why should they fund you on the research that you're proposing? Don't forget, this is not about financial need, and it's not about, them giving you money because you want it. You have to make a case for them. You have to make a solid argument to them. And this has come up from all three presenters. The argument matters. The argument is the thing. And you have to convince them. Convince these strangers out there in the world who are academics but are not experts in your field necessarily. I think what I'll do now is move on to the presentation-y part of this. So I've got more slides in a PowerPoint, and I want to cover some other sort of ground in there. And there'll be some repeat from some of the points that the presenters brought up and that we've talked about, but repeating points that need to be emphasized and repeated and brought home to you is not necessarily a bad thing. So let me go back to share my screen and we will go through those things together. By the way, for the three panelists, if you have other things to do and you don't want to stay around or you can't stay around, feel free to leave. You're not obligated to stay here. But if you want to stay around in case there's further questions or whatever, you're certainly welcome to. But if you need to leave, I totally understand. You can all see my screen again. Is that right? Yes? Okay. So let me move on then to a couple of things. There's no guarantees in any of this, right? The success rates, I don't have them in my head, but they're pretty low. I think they're in the 20s, maybe low 30s, something like that. So most people won't get funded, and I have certainly been the recipient of that. But what I would like to emphasize to you is that there's ways of maximizing the possibilities for yourself. And that is through putting together the package in the way that it needs to be put together, but also writing a proposal that is going to get just that you knock right out of the park. So there's no guarantees, but it is worthwhile trying anyway, if you're eligible. I'll go through a little tiny bit about the value of these things. And these amounts have not changed in 20 years when I first started applying. They're the same amounts. So the short doctoral is $20,000 for 4 possible years for a total of 80. However, the Canada Graduate Scholarships doctoral program is $35K over 3 months, which is what Ghislaine was awarded. And you don't have to apply separately for that. You're automatically if you apply for the short doctoral, you're automatically eligible and considered for the Canada Graduate Scholarship doctoral. Canada Graduate Scholarship Master's Program is $17.5K over 12 months. Usually people are in their first year of their master's when they apply this, and then they may or may not get funding, but it's for the second year, $17,500. And then the Ontario graduate scholarships are $15,000 per year for a possible 4 years. So a total of $60K. So that's the amounts that we're looking at. And this is about research funds. So the idea here is that these awards are to support your research so that you don't have to otherwise be working and taking time away from your studies and your research, right? This money supports your research so that you don't have to work as much. So that's what that's for. I have a few kind of steps that I want to outline for you. I believe there's 5 of them. So step 1 is to ensure that you are eligible to apply. And both SSHRC and OGS have different eligibility criteria. It is up to you each as applicants to make sure you're eligible, but to put it in a brief nutshell, for the SSHRC doctoral and the CGS masters, you have to be a citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. So there it is there. There's other criteria as well, so you need to look at that. For the OGS, you have to be enrolled or intend to enroll full-time. And for the SSHRC, you have to be full-time as well also. The Ontario Graduate Scholarship, you can be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or a visa student. So that leaves open the possibility that international students could apply. So if you're not eligible, if you don't determine that right away, you might be going to a bunch of work and you're not even eligible to apply. So that's why I put that as the very first step. Are you eligible? If you are, great. What I would do as an organizational matter, and this is what I actually did do whenever I applied, is to go in and do the organizational work. Record the deadlines, and I'll get to those in a moment. Create a timeline for yourself, however you want to do it, and a checklist for completion. There's various things you have to do to submit a complete application, and the application absolutely has to be complete. There can't be anything missing or else it's game over. And also do the work into figuring out, and this is the sort of daunting part that Rupinder was mentioning, do the work to figure out how and where to apply. And those are on the Lakehead Research website. I'll send you the link down the road, but it's fairly clear-ish about where and how to go about doing these things. But it's your job mainly to figure those things out for yourself. So keep organized throughout all that. Deadlines, here we go. The SSHRC doctoral, if you're planning on applying, is the 19th of October. And this is a Lakehead internal deadline. So that's coming up fairly quickly, less than a month. So if you're going to apply for that, then hopefully you've already started, at least on your proposal. The SSHRC Masters, is due internally on December 1st. So you've got a little bit more time to get there. And to find the research portal, Google NSERC Masters Program. NSERC stands for Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. And then finally, the OGS is due December 3rd. So a little bit more time there again. Both the master's and doctoral, and you can find the portal to that at myawards.lakeheadu.ca. Allison, if you're there, can you tell me if that portal that My Awards is open at this point?
No, unfortunately, we're still waiting on a new system. So fingers crossed that it's going to open at the end of October in time for OGS time. But if we have to, we'll be doing paper applications. So I really, really hope that October opening will happen. Cross all your fingers.
Okay, yes, I'll cross mine as well. Good to know, thank you. So there's the deadlines that you're looking at. So if I were any of you applying, I would look at that deadline and I would do a backward mapping out of the process. To-do list, start early. This has already come up. Start early, start today. You can, if you don't have access to everything to put all the pieces together, you can certainly start thinking about what you want to propose in your 1-page or your 2-page, whichever it is. I believe with SSHRC anyways, you can access and begin filling out the online forms. You can begin doing the Canadian Common CV if you're doing the masters, etc. So you can start sort of chipping away at that stuff. Order transcripts, undergrad and grad. Do those early. Sometimes they take a while to arrive. And so you don't want to be doing this at the last minute because they take some time. And speaking of taking time, the other thing you need to apply, for better or for worse, is 2 faculty members to be referees for you. And this is sort of a little bit of a tricky thing because you rely on these 2 others to do a favor for you. It's our job, yes, but it's also a favor insofar as it is extra work on us because we have to write a letter. It's not just that you add our name and our contact info and SSHRC or OGS contacts us. We actually have to write letters, and those take time and those take energy and thought if they're done well. So what that means is that you need to ask us early, and you know, most of the time, most people will be quite agreeable, but it is just showing common courtesy really to say, you know, would you be able to do this for me? And choose people who know your work. That's sort of one of the criteria, I guess, for choosing faculty members to write letters. If they know your work, your thesis supervisor, for instance, or a committee member, or somebody who's taught you a course and you did well in that course and you know, you got along with them and, you know, all that, then those are people to consider asking to write letters. But consider their time is the point.
May I add, please ask them first before you put their name into the system, because most of the systems, when you put your, like you're thinking of someone and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to ask Gerald and Meredith. As soon as you put my name or Gerald's name in, it will email us. And yes, I will usually write you a letter, but it's kind of like, oh, they didn't even talk to me first. And be prepared to give that person a copy of your updated CV.
Yeah, absolutely. That's happened to me a few times as well. And it sort of comes out of nowhere. So yes, definitely have a conversation with that person because, you know, it's possible they may say no. I mean, it's sort of doubtful. That shouldn't happen, but it could. And it's just common courtesy to give them the heads up anyways. Compose proposals, 2 pages for doctoral and 1 page for masters in OGS. We've been through this a little bit before, actually a lot before. I'm going to go through in a bit details of what those proposals should contain. So I'll get to that in a second. Here's another thing that is a little bit daunting. Follow the formatting directions to a T. So in the case of SSHRC doctoral, for instance, they want it on 2 pages and they specify what the specifications are for formatting that document. Don't do anything different. Don't try to get creative or unique or cutesy. Don't do it. Just do as you're told is basically what it comes down to. Format it as they want to see it. Because if you don't, that's not going to go well for you. And it's amazing how many people don't. They don't have the margins right. They're not using the right font or the right size, you name it. Your proposal is going to be something that may drive you crazy insofar as how you will have to, in all likelihood, revise it over and over and over and over again. And you should get good feedback from whomever you send it to, but particularly your supervisor if you have one. And if you send it to me, you will certainly get solid feedback from me. And my feedback is not intended to find fault and to, you know, rip it to shreds because I like doing that. Feedback from me is about showing where things need to be made stronger to make your proposal as competitive as it can be. So, and the other thing is, I'm happy to look at a proposal, but you need to work with your supervisor first. I won't look at it if your supervisor hasn't looked at it. It's their job first, and I expect them to do it. So in your email to me where you're asking me to look at your proposal, I want to hear, oh yes, my supervisor so-and-so has looked at it and we've shared it back and forth. So if I don't see that, I'm going to ask you, but do it first so that I don't have to ask you. The third point, gain an understanding of the funding agency or the funding program. Now, this might seem like an odd thing to put in, but it does seem to me that if you are applying in competitive competitions like this, then it is very useful to understand what the funding agency is, what their priorities are, and how they go about things, and kind of what their philosophy is and what it is they're wanting to see. So let me give you a bit of an example here. SHRC, on their website, say things like this: we help Canada realize its potential in the 21st century. So they're making grand statements here, but they're obviously, from this statement, you can tell they're focused on Canada-focused research. We help Canada realize its potential. Therefore, your proposal, I think, should kind of convey in some kind of way how relevant this is to Canada in current times. SHRC-funded research, I put that word in highlighting. SHRC-funded research builds understanding as a central component of Canadian innovation. There's Canada again, and there's research right there. So they are focused on research, as opposed to something else that I'll get to in a second. An eligible graduate must have a significant research component. So there it is. Your proposal has to be research focused very, very solidly, and it has to focus on Canada. So knowing this about SHRC helps you design and strategize your proposal, right? SHRC doctoral fellowships are meant to support high caliber students to develop the next generation of researchers and leaders across society. Another grand statement, but there's the word research in there, right? So they're being repetitive for a reason. Canada Graduate Scholarship Masters, we help develop research skills. It's right there again. High standard of achievement in undergraduate and early graduate studies. So it's all about research, folks, for SHRC. OGS is a little bit different. So yes, they want to see research as well, but they encourage, and this is right from the site, they encourage academic excellence in graduate studies at both master's and doctoral level. So what that means is research is part of studies, of course. You can, and you should apply if you have a solid research program going or planning to have one. But here's where course route students have a way in, because course route is not research. There is no research going on in a course route program, but those are studies, obviously. So course route students can find a way of applying for an OGS by focusing on the studies. And the way that I would go about doing that if I were in that position would be to highlight what I'm doing in my studies, highlight what I'm focusing on. If you're, for instance, in education for change and your specialization is Indigenous studies, make that comment, or let them know that, put that in your proposal. Talk about other courses that you've taken that are related to that specialization. Indicate quite clearly what you want to get out of the master's program, and in particular, your sort of focus of studies. And that's sort of how you frame a proposal for OGS if you are a course route student. So it's not about the research, it's about the studies. Whereas if you're course route, then don't even bother with SHRC, because they're all about the research, right? So it's good to know what the funding agency is about so that you know how to frame what it is you want to tell them. Point 4, understand what is required for a full application package. And this goes back to the organizational stuff I was talking about earlier. So in general, SHRC doctoral, there's a bunch of web-based forms. And those are about stating your educational background, you have a bit of a profile, work experience, credentials, publications, if any, areas of study, etc. There's some various things there. Research proposal, max 2 pages. Bibliography and citations, max 5 pages. Transcripts, any research contributions if there are any, and you can go outside of academia for that. If you've done research in some other professional capacity or whatever, that's legit. And referees and contact information. So that's generally what a package looks like. There's a lot of pieces, so you have to kind of, be organized about how you are collecting those and putting them together. SHRC Masters, CGS Masters rather, application, proposed research, 1 page, bibliography and citations, transcripts, the Canadian Common CV, which, we've talked about earlier, it's kind of cumbersome and clunky and tedious. Once you have it though, you have it. So that's the benefit of having that. It doesn't go away. And two reference assessments. So again, that's where you need to ask people early if they would do those. OGS, the application form. 2 academic assessment reports. That's the reference letters. Research program statement, awards publication if applicable, declaration of previous awards and prizes if applicable, up-to-date transcripts, temporary resident visa, study permit if that's applicable. So that generally is what the OGS package looks like. A fair number of pieces. Oh, and notice, consent, and signature page. So the 5th kind of step that I would suggest and that I used to do myself is understand the anatomy, what I'm calling the anatomy of a research plan, because even though there's some variation, generally speaking, a research plan looks kind of like this. So the proposal or the research plan. In the very first paragraph, if I'm reviewing proposals, or when I review proposals, I want to know what the problem is right away. Meredith and I talked about that a bit ago. What is the problem? Why is it important? Why do your readers have to care? Right? What is the benefit that your research is going to have, and to whom? What is your research question, questions, or problem statement? State that pretty early on. I don't want to have to wait for that and twiddle my fingers as I'm waiting and get frustrated and annoyed. Theoretical framework, that would be sort of a little lit review piece. In what body or bodies of theory is the problem situated? So again, you give a brief indication of what the scholarship is in the area you're talking about. And then what I'm going to want to see is some indication of how your proposed research adds to what is already known. And you don't have to, this isn't necessarily a mind-bending thing. You can say, there's a gap in the research in this way, or you can say so-and-so recommends further research be done in this area. And so that's how you can legitimately say, my research is going to do that. So there's easy ways of connecting your research to the existing scholarship. Methodology, what's your underlying approach to your research? Your methodology should be reasonable based on the question you've posed, right? It should make sense that you've posed this question, your methodology seems like a reasonable way to investigate the question. And then how will you undertake your research? What are the actual steps you're going to take? What are the analytical tools perhaps that you might use? And so on. So there's the methodology, which is the methodological approach, and then there's the actual steps, which is the method. Analysis of data. What are you going to do with the data you collect? How are you going to analyze it? Give a few brief steps. Again, you don't have a lot of room, but give some steps on how you will analyze that. How you will, for instance, if you're doing qualitative work, which most education students do, how will you analyze the data you collect into themes and codes and all that stuff? And if you're a doctoral student, you can make mention in a sentence or two how you might disseminate your findings. And so you might indicate, a relevant conference or two, or you might indicate a relevant journal or two. It's probably better to be specific about those things rather than just saying, I'll present my work at conferences and I'll publish it in journals, right? So that's vague. If you give absolute titles, then it shows that you've done more of your homework. So that, roughly speaking, is the anatomy of a research plan, and your proposal, whether it's 1 or 2 pages, should kind of cover this ground. It's not an easy job.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
One is that, and I put it in the chat, subheadings are really important.
Yes, they
So
are.
we see people all the time who submit and they just answer each of those questions. I know it takes room, but at least put a subheading in there, because remember, as Ghislaine, I think it was, said, this could be sitting at the edge of someone's desk. They're picking it up between doing something else. They want to know what your context and your research questions are. They want to know what your theoretical framework is, your methodology. Make sure you include analysis if you can, because that's a shortcoming a lot of people have in their proposals, and dissemination. So just make sure that, you know, it's clear. And sometimes SSHRC and OGS have naming conventions that they prefer for these sections. So that will be on their website. The other is, like, we write a lot of big research grants all the time, 100-page research grants through the SSHRC portal. And what we find works really well is to just make a folder. So like I have one I would have one marked 2021 OGS application. Put all of your pieces in there. Make sure that every time you have a new draft, save all the drafts. Every time you have a new draft, put a new name, you know, a new date on it, and then like I'll put like Gerald's edits on it so that I can quickly find. I keep the same naming convention, but I have, for like, if I have something that has 12 different pieces to upload to SSHRC, then I have 12 different documents and I number them so they're not missed. And one that is just like everything else that gets put into a copy-paste field on SSHRC. And we find that that way things don't get lost. And then next year, if I'm reapplying to OGS, I have all of that there and I can just revise what I had.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And just to go back to the subheadings, Meredith is right. Subheadings help. But when it comes to the formatting, so you don't have a lot of room to play with on 2 pages or 1. So one of the things that I did, and it worked, and I've seen lots of other people do this, this isn't a unique thing, is to not have, for instance, methodology taking up a whole line. Have it on a line and then colon and then start in on your sentences right on the same line. And between sections, you don't need to have a whole return because that takes up room too. You can just add white space to the paragraph so that there's a little bit of white space between each section, but it's not a whole line. So there's little tricks to kind of squeeze things in, and those are 2 of them. Other things to know, be methodical. This is not the easiest thing for some people. Some people work in different ways. Some people have different work habits, whatever, and that's fine. But when it comes to doing something like this, I would argue that one needs to be methodical. So that's where I was going back to the organization. Have a checklist, have your timeline, pay attention to that, do things as time goes on. Don't try to do it in the last 2 days because there's no point, and so on. So be methodical about what you're doing. Be organized. Do things in advance. You already know this, right? I still, even though I hammer that point home in all of these workshops that I do annually, I still see people kind of doing things at the last minute and they just sort of bomb out. So do things in advance. I know you're all busy. You've got families, you've got studies, you've got jobs, etc. But this is what has to be done if you're going to submit a competitive application package. Contact potential referees darn soon. To find more information about these things, for SSHRC Doctoral, just Google SSHRC Doctoral Fellowship. You'll find it pretty easily. And a whole bunch of information, and you have to, on SSHRC, you have to create an account and the whole business. And once you are in your account, then you can access more details on their instructions. And when I was applying for these things, I would print those out and I would mark all over them and I would highlight things and I would read them a million times. But you can't get to the instructions until you are inside, you create and you're inside your account. But that's how you begin, Shirk Doctoral Fellowship. CGS Masters, Google Canada Graduate Scholarships Masters Program. And that should come up pretty readily. And OGS, navigate from myawards.lakeheadu.ca. And as Allison was saying, the forms aren't there. Hopefully they will be by the end of October. But anyway, you can get information, more information about the program by going there. I will be sending out proposals. I'm going to put them on the drive, and these are all funded proposals, including my own. So you will be able to, if you want, and you would be smart to, read them, not for their content, but read them for how they are put together and the level of language used, how they're free of jargon, etc. Just read them for the style. So I will make a folder available of those for those who want to read a few exemplars, because like I said, these were all successful. And I will wish you happy writing. That's really all I have to say about things. But of course, we do have time for questions and so on. So I've thrown a ton at you. Who has questions? Who has concerns? Who has anxieties about these things? The field is open.
I was going to say, remind me to send you mine.
Thank you. Yes. And I'm going to ask all three of the panelists. I don't think they're all three are here though, but I'm going to ask them for theirs as well. Are there any specific questions in the chat, Meredith, which I haven't even looked at, but has a question?
Robin has a question and that she's working on right now. Sabrina said, thank you.
You're welcome, Sabrina.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, there's examples on the website, like just even if you Google it, you could look at examples from all across Canada. And also a great resource is YouTube. They have a lot of help walking you through the application process on YouTube videos, so you can also check that out.
I did not know that. Thank you. That's good. Would you be able to send me a few links, Allison?
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you. Robin. Robin, do you still have a question? Do you want to type it or? Oh, okay.
She said, I received SHRC, but then I switched to course route during my master's due to the impact of COVID. Will this make it difficult for me to get another grant? I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but course route, you know, as I was saying earlier, course route means that you're really only eligible for OGS and you need to frame it in a very particular way. And so, and I described, you know, gave some hints and suggestions for doing that. If you want to contact me after the fact, Robin, I can, you know, we can have a fuller conversation about that. But yes, since you are no longer going to be doing research, then OGS is kind of your only option.
There are also some internal awards that will be posted as soon as our new system. So it was formerly My Awards and now it'll be, I'm not sure yet, but all the awards that are depending on the department, or they could be a specific student. So looking at maybe a student who has been doing research specific Northwest Ontario or grew up in Thunder Bay, those kinds of criteria are all sorts of the donor awards, and those will be going out later, but I'll send out mass emails on those kinds of things once we have a better idea of the new system.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, those are, if you apply for any of those other kinds of awards, then those can certainly be put on a CV for future applications to SHRC and OGS. That's for sure. Tyler, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, how are you? You said you were going to put examples of applications on a drive. What drive?
Google Drive. So that seems to me the best place to put it so that anyone and everyone has access to it. So I'll put it on a drive and I will make it, I'm not precisely sure, and so Meredith might need to lead me through this about how to make it accessible.
Okay.
But you will be able to access the folder and, read the applications.
Okay,
So
great.
that'll be in the next few days.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We can also set them so that you can't download them. You can only view them.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
There was one from Claudia. There were two questions. One from Claudia asking whether your publications have to be exactly in your field, and that's no. Your recent publications. And the other one from Anne was whether, go back. So asking about, so she's a second year MEd student, would she need to submit academic transcripts for both the bachelor's and MEd first year? Yes. However, if you're in the second year of your MEd, if you're not planning on going to a PhD, this is not till the next year. So like we apply in, as Shirk always does, you apply really early and then you wait for 8 months to hear whether you get it. So it actually would not, like if you apply this year, you're not, you wouldn't have any funds before next year. So you may be finished unless you're planning on applying for your PhD.
Yes. Yep, that's right. Anyone else? I want to say something, or it's already come up, but I want to add to the notion of not being successful. As I said earlier, I have not been successful with Shirk. And it was a preoccupation of mine for a while when I was a doctoral student to make it work. And I eventually did. But in the meantime, yes, I encountered disappointment. And one of the things about these processes is if you are not successful, you do not get feedback as to why you weren't or what you can do to improve the next time. So when I was not successful with Shirk the first time or the second time, I was absolutely in the dark about what I was supposed to do to make it better the third time. And so, part of the process, if you are in that position, part of the process is, first of all, picking yourself up and dusting yourself off and carrying on, but also trying to get feedback from somebody who will spend some time reading your proposal after the fact to say, I wasn't successful. I really don't know why. I thought this was pretty good. Do you have time to look this over and give me feedback? When I was a doctoral student, after the 2 bomb outs I had, I was a Queen's student, so I found somebody in my faculty at Queen's who had been on Shirk adjudication committees. And so I asked him if he would be willing to give me feedback. And he didn't read my proposal, but he did ask me to describe what it is I had done. And then he sort of gave me feedback in our meeting right then and there. And one of the things I learned from him is that my proposal was conceptual and I needed to bring in an actual empirical research piece of that. That's what was missing from my proposal. And in theory, we shouldn't have to do empirical work, really. Like a conceptual or a philosophical piece should be funded on its own merits. But for whatever reason, that was his advice to me, and I took it to heart. So in my third attempt, I brought in a data collection piece. I did a bunch of interviews. I did some policy analysis. I explained how I was going to analyze both of those realms of data, and lo and behold, I got it. So the point I'm getting at here is it's partly about initiative for you to figure out what went wrong and to get feedback and to go from there. Any feedback you get might not be right, so there's no guarantees in any of this. And the prof that I talked to at the time might have been completely incorrect, bang on incorrect, but I don't think he was. I think he was giving me sound feedback based on his experience. So, so that's what it means. It means not taking it personally. It means, yes, you're disappointed and it's, you know, not the best news, but you carry on and you figure out what the next plan is.
Well, and I'll add that, you know, as with what the panelists said, it sure helps you to clarify your ideas. So if you go into it thinking not, I'm going into this for funding, if you go into it thinking, I'm going into this to be able to clarify my ideas so that I'm able to talk about them, I know where I'm at, like it gave me a lot of clarity. What I said in the chat was that my supervisor and I had 70 drafts of the first time that I applied for SHRC. It was fewer the next time and it was fewer the next time. But I'm a pretty good writer. And even then, you know, there were things that we were finding and it needs to be perfect. So if you're thinking, okay, you know, I'm just going to write one draft of this, I'm not saying that you won't be funded, but you likely will not be funded. And so how it works within the university is we are asked to rank applications for OGS. So a panel of people look at them, we look at the evaluation criteria, we talk about them, we say, this is the strongest, this is the next, this is the next. And then a panel of people within the university rank our applications, and we have a quota that we send forward. And Allison did point out that, you know, in OGS, we do have a quota for domestic students and a lesser quota, but there is still a quota for international students. With SHRC, it's, you know, we get, say, these are our top 8, and here's ranked the rest. And and you never know, like all of the people that were on the panel said, well, I was, you know, on the backup list for SHRC, and that happens. Sometimes someone's not able to complete their studies or their circumstances change and they're not able to take, and it might be, especially if you're on the backup list for OGS, that someone because you're required to take the external funding first. So someone gets the OGS, they're ranked really high in OGS, but then they get a SHRC, well then that opens up a spot on the OGS list. So there, you know, there's a little play around there, and it's just really important, I think, to think about applying, even though you might go, oh, that's so much work. It gives you good practice. You learn the language that SHRC uses. You learn the formats that SHRC uses. You learn to really be able to put your research into words that other people can understand, which is really hard when you're an academic and you're thinking, you know, you speak with your colleagues using this terminology and these structures, but the people that are reading it are probably not educators. There might be some, but they're probably not educators. So you need to write it in a way that someone who has, you know, a doctoral level degree, but may not know your field. So it might be someone in history. So if you're talking about, if you really need to use those terms that are specific to education or that are specific to your field, make sure that you define them and try to cut down on, you know, make it more generally applicable. So it is good to find somebody who's in a different field, who doesn't have any background and can say, you know, like this makes sense. And just, you know, keep trying. I was saying that, you know, we had, we have a project that we're applying for. This is this is our 4th time resubmitting it. So it happens to us, and we have, you know, projects that have been successful. And I said, you know, the one, it was 96 pages. Your SHRC will not be 96 pages, but it was 96 pages. But when it got, you know, funded, just think about it, $2,000 a page. That's what your investment was worth. Yeah,
absolutely. And Meredith is right. Like, even if you're not funded, there's reasons. Yes, it's a lot of work. There's no question about that, but it is worth trying because, as Meredith was saying, it is an opportunity for you to develop some skill with writing in a way that is accessible to a broader audience, because that's really what you're doing. So it's a good opportunity to do that. And it's also a good opportunity, whether you're successful or not, to, in 1 or 2 pages, really crystallize what it is you're doing. It's like if you're in a course and one of the assignments or one of the activities in class is for you to do an elevator pitch, and you have to, pitch your research proposal, your idea for research in 3 or 4 sentences, whatever it is, pretending you're in an elevator and you have just that amount of time to do it. It's that same idea. You have a limited space and limited time to do it, and so you have to do it in the most effective way you possibly can. And that, whether you're successful or not, that benefits your proposal down the line, whether you're master's or doctoral, and that ultimately benefits your comprehensive proposal if you're doctoral, and it benefits your thesis development or dissertation development as well. So it's kind of win-win, even if you don't get the cash, to be honest. It's good practice. It's good practice. Any other questions coming in chat, or does anybody want to verbalize a question?
Suzanne had a question about why not passive voice, and I mentioned because it makes you sound less certain and that you're downplaying yourself, and it's also wordier and usually much more grammatically complex. So yeah, the fun part of applying to SHRC. So yeah, we tend to, as academics, downplay ourselves, and this is the point where you don't want to sound really like you're bragging, but you want to sound like you're confident. Because the majority of what they're doing here is judging whether you are eligible, like whether you're able to do what you say. And that goes through all SHRC applications. They have like a feasibility rating all the way through SHRC, even after you graduate with your PhD. And they're looking that, yeah, I can do what I said I would do.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, one from Sabrina. Can you discuss the fun part of applying for SHRC?
The fun part.
Just a joke.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it can, I don't know that I'd use the word fun, but it can be rewarding once you get to the point of, looking at your one pager and it's been hacked apart and re-put back together and edited to death, all the rest of it, or your 2-pager, whichever it is. And you have in front of you, after that whole process, you have in front of you a stellar piece of work. That is very rewarding. It's very rewarding. I want to just go back just for a moment to the previous question, which was on, Meredith, what were you just talking about? I'm drawing the blank.
Passive voice.
Passive voice, yes, thank you. So I've read all sorts of proposals where somebody might say something like, the data will be analyzed by doing this, that, or the other thing. And I immediately flag that and I say, well, who's going to analyze it? You haven't really said, right? That's passive voice. The data will be analyzed. That doesn't tell me anything. What I want to read is, I will analyze the data by using this, that, or the other thing. That is a sort of declarative, more confident way to go about it. So don't write passively. Don't write in passive tense. Write in active tense and use I and me. None of this, the researcher will blah, blah. No. I and me.
And specific.
And yeah, it's specific. Yeah, absolutely. I know that goes against some of your training, and I get that. It's a little bit weird and uncomfortable for some of you maybe, but do it anyway. That's what's called for.
And I will say that what you're submitting to SHRC is a proposal for research. They're not going to check to see that they don't follow through. So as long as, what you're doing is not catastrophically different from what you proposed, if, for example, you say, I really want to do in-person research, and then you have a pandemic and you have to settle for interviews and you're getting some of the same data the same way, like, or how Robin had said how she was forced to sort of change direction with the pandemic, like they understand that that happens.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the nature of research is that you can have the best plan that you can possibly create, and it's going to change. It's going to change in minor ways. It might even change in major ways, but it's going to change in some ways. So what you have on paper and, you know, you get funded, you are not beholden to that plan to a T. You can make changes in accordance with different circumstances, or, you know, you might discover that you plan to do something and it seemed reasonable, but somehow it's just not working out, whatever. All of that's fine. Nobody's going to come chasing after you to say, you know, did you do what you said you were going to do? And if you didn't, then we're going to take the funding away. That's not going to happen. Once you get the funding, then that's sort of it. You have to be reasonable about that. But you're not, it's not carved in stone. It's not carved in stone. And research always changes. The plan always changes. So we have a few minutes left. Any other last minute questions? Otherwise, I'll close it and you can email me after the fact or whatever, but we have 5 minutes left. Anything else burning on your minds, or any other question that you've been dying to ask, but you haven't found the moment to jump in, which is typically what I do. Okay, I am available. You know how to reach me. How can we improve our writing? One more question's coming. How can we improve our writing so that we can prepare ourselves from 1 year writing thesis? Are there specific research papers? So improving writing, first of all, practically everyone needs to improve the writing. So everyone can stand to improve the writing. And when I was applying for these things, you know, Meredith was talking about 70 iterations of hers in the first attempt, I think it was. And mine went through a continual process of editing all the way along. I don't really know how many versions I had, but it was constant editing. It needs to be grammatically sound and correct. It needs to be punctuated perfectly. I'm not big on perfectionism, but this calls for it in some ways. I hate to say it. So the writing has to be pretty solid. There are resources for helping students with their writing, the Writing Center, Lakehead International, other places. So those resources are there, and some students would benefit from accessing some of those resources. So that's all I can say about that. I was going to say something.
I remember the first thing I ever gave my supervisor, we were working on a shared project, and she brought out her red pen and she had something like 50 circles in the first paragraph of where I started a sentence with this without a referent. So, you know, and the teaching commons, yeah. So there are a lot of really good resources. If you have a supervisor, a master supervisor or a doctoral supervisor, they can also, or they should also be helping you to be able to navigate the university's complex web of services so that you can, you know, or know who to ask, or if they, you know, send to me. The Writing Center, the Teaching Commons, there's also all sorts of tutorials online. Grammarly is also very helpful. We used to have a Grammarly Professional. We're in the process of proposing to have Grammarly Professional again, but Grammarly is something you can sign up for free, and it will check not just your grammar, but some of the contextual pieces. And the Academic Success Center. So lots of resources, but it's important to access them early.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to echo what you said about the word this in starting a sentence, because it is often feedback I give in student work, in proposals, and anything where, you know, a sentence has been used and there's various factors in that sentence, and then the next sentence is this, ... And, you know, I raise this all the time. What are you referring to? What does this refer to? Referent, absolutely. I see that all the time. So be careful how you use those words. It needs to be clear what you mean by this. It needs to be crystal clear.
Yeah. Well, I trained myself not to use this anymore at the beginning of sentences unless I'd say what. It's because we use that in oral language to kind of refer back to kind of the gist of what we're talking about, but written language is different. It's specific. Each sentence has to be self-contained. So if you don't say this what, I don't know what part of the last sentence or the last paragraph that you're referring to.
Yeah. Basically we have a minute left, so I think I'll probably draw it to a close, but you know how to reach me. Thank you, Allison, for being here and contributing to some pretty valuable information that you brought. Thank you for that. Meredith, thank you for just, being part of the discussion and holding this. I want to thank the panel as well, Rupinder, Fatima, and Ghislaine, none of whom are here anymore, but I want to officially thank them anyways. Thank you for questions and comments that came up. I guess be good to yourself as you're going through this process. It can be frustrating, it can be daunting, but I would say do it anyway, but be gentle on yourself and go at it piece by piece over time, and it won't feel quite as stressful as if you're leaving things to not even the last minute, but just sort of late. So with that, I will close the session, I guess, and